Love and loss, sexual harassment, struggles with gender identity, restrictions in a deeply patriarchal system. These are just some of the themes addressed in our Women on the Ground, a book that brings together the voices of 19 Arab women journalists, and they hail from Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Palestine, and that list goes on. The woman behind that book is Zahra Hankir, a journalist herself, and she joins us in the studio today. Thank you so much for being with us, Zahra.
Thank you.
Tell us about the idea behind this book, the first of its kind.
Of course. For many years, I've been a journalist myself, an Arab woman journalist, and I felt like there was a gap in the narrative, in the discourse on the Arab world and the Middle East when it comes to international media in particular. Foreign correspondents who are often given attention with coverage on the region are Western, usually, and for many decades have been male as well. That's starting to change. But my goal with this book was to fill that gap in the narrative by giving local women voices in that particular space, because they've been doing such incredible work over the years. And I felt like we need to amplify those voices and also to recognize the challenges that they face and the ways in which they then overcome those challenges by navigating male-dominated spaces and using their womanhood as an advantage.
And of course, this wasn't an easy feat. One of the contributors, Hannah Alam, questions, and I quote this: "How do you report a story where pain is etched on the face of every woman that you interview?" In a way, you were also very much doing that. You were dealing with women who themselves have witnessed very traumatic events.
Indeed. I felt that I had to navigate the editing process and curation process with a lot of sensitivity, given the traumas that they had endured. A lot of these women were not used to writing about their experiences in the way that they did for this book, because essentially what I asked them to do was to take a step behind the day-to-day coverage and all of the trauma that they were covering, and to address the trauma that they were experiencing themselves, many of them, not all of them, and to reflect on what it meant for them and how important that coverage was for them. And a lot of the essays, as you know, are quite harrowing because they were dealing with quite hefty subjects and life developments.
Absolutely, and I mentioned some of those themes earlier. Now, I'd like to bring in one of those voices, Zaina Erhaim, a Syrian journalist who writes the chapter Hurma. Let's take a listen.
My chapter in Our Woman on the Ground is titled Hurma. And Hurma in Arabic is a name for women which implements lots of passiveness, weakness, dependence. And this is something that I was forced to feel while working inside Syria, in North Held Syria, when it was controlled by rebels who mostly turned into being extremist jihadists after 2013. By then, I was having that struggle between being myself and independent and powerful. But inside Syria, I needed someone to really welcome me whenever I want to go, and I needed a companion to cross the checkpoints with me. So this is the main struggle that I had to highlight. So 3 elements: being a woman, being local, and being journalist in a conflict zone, which happens to be your home.
Zahra, hearing from Zaina there, it's not just about their struggles, is it? Some of these women, all of them in fact, have overcome a great deal of challenges to produce some extraordinary work.
Exactly, and I think Zaina's a perfect example of that, because essentially she was faced with all of those restrictions in terms of how to travel from one point to another, in terms of how she had to dress and cover her hair, in terms of also just the emotional and psychological impact of a conflict that was unfolding in her own homeland. But what she then did was really rise above those challenges by navigating certain spaces that were off limits to male journalists, particularly foreign male journalists. And her being a local was a real asset, because she was able to go into spaces that were off limits to those journalists. For example, a Syrian gynecological clinic. She enters that space, she takes the cameras with her, she tells these stories that I believe nobody else would be able to actually tell. I mean, her being a local and a woman was a real asset because she was able to navigate those spaces.
It's wonderful that we're looking at both sides of the story there. Now, of course, with this anthology, you're giving a platform to these remarkable women to tell their own story, which they do, and they have a great deal to tell us. But you're also very much trying to broaden the understanding of this rather intricate region, which is also what we try and do with this program.
For sure. I mean, I feel that the book in particular illustrates the diversity of the region by the sheer selection of women in the book. I mean, they're all from different parts of the region. They all have different ideological and personal and religious beliefs. And I feel that kind of dents the idea of, you know, what an Arab woman is. It wasn't on the top of my mind when I was curating this book. It was just the outcome of curating such a book, because I wanted to illustrate that diversity, and all of the women told these incredibly diverse stories. And to me, that really gives a more nuanced idea of the region and the women behind the region.
Zahra Hankir, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for coming on Middle East Matters.
Thank you so much for
to
having
talk
me.
about this extraordinary book, Our Women on the Ground. Do go and get yourself a coffee. Thank you for watching this edition of Middle East Matters. Do stay tuned.